Everyone rejected the silent Omega girl at the ceremony, until the Alpha King marked her. The kingdom of Urandor stretched beneath a crimson moon, its spires of black stone piercing the night sky. Magic lingered in the air, subtle yet potent, like the hum of a living heartbeat. Tonight was the ceremony of bonds, a tradition older than any living king. It was the night when Omegas were presented, their fates tied to the powerful Alphas of the realm. Among the gathered nobles, whispers floated like shadows. At the center of the grand hall stood a young girl whose presence drew more silence than applause. Lyra, the silent Omega, was a mystery even to those who knew her. She did not speak. She had never spoken. Some said she was cursed. Others claimed she carried a hidden power too dangerous to reveal. Her hair fell in waves of silver under the moonlight, and her eyes, pale as frost, seemed to pierce through the souls of all who dared look. The nobles tittered, some with disdain, some with curiosity. When an Omega arrived at the ceremony, it was a test of grace, charm, and presence. Lyra had none of these, at least in the way others expected. Her quiet composure made her seem fragile, but the tension around her suggested a force waiting to awaken. One by one, Alphas came forward. Each was tall, commanding, their presence demanding attention. One after another, they examined her with critical eyes, nodding or shaking their heads. Each rejection stung in the air, invisible yet sharp. The court murmured. Some whispered cruelly about her silence. Others wondered why no Alpha dared claim her. Lyra's expression never wavered. She did not flinch, she did not plead. She simply waited, a calm storm in the midst of chaos. Then came the Alpha King, Kale. His arrival was heralded by silence, even the court's chatter falling to a hush. He was a figure carved from legends, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes that burned like molten gold. His presence alone seemed to bend the light in the hall, drawing all gazes toward him. Many feared him, for his rule was known to be merciless and his power unmatched. Kale walked slowly, each step deliberate, his gaze locked on Lyra. Unlike the others, he did not whisper or smirk. He observed her as one might study a flame, curious, cautious, and yet unwilling to look away. When he reached her, the hall held its breath. "You are Lyra," he said, his voice deep, carrying weight and authority. His tone did not mock, it did not hesitate. It simply acknowledged her existence, as if naming her made the world hold still. Lyra inclined her head slightly. She did not speak. She could not, but her silence was not weakness. In the stillness of her body, in the quiet of her gaze, she conveyed something far stronger than words. Kale circled her slowly, his eyes studying her from every angle. He was aware of the court's expectations, of the nobles watching eagerly for him to reject her as the others had. But something in Lyra stirred something in him, a spark that both intrigued and unnerved him. The nobles shifted, some whispering, some daring to glance with wide eyes. Many had expected Kale to turn away, perhaps even mock her like the others. Yet he did neither. Instead, he raised his hand and the hall fell into an unnatural silence. Even the guards seemed to pause in their vigilance, as if the world itself waited. From the folds of his robe, Kale drew a small, ornate dagger. Its blade shimmered faintly with crimson light, a symbol of the Alpha's bond, used to mark one chosen soul. Gasps echoed softly in the hall. To mark an Omega was to bind their destiny to the Alpha, not by force but by the weight of fate itself. Lyra's heart beat faster, though no one could hear it. She had never been marked, never claimed, and never feared what would come. And yet, as Kale stepped closer, something deep within her stirred, a mixture of awe, fear, and an unfamiliar longing. The king knelt, bringing the dagger to her hand. The crimson sigil burned briefly in its glow, warm and alive. The court's whispers swelled into murmurs of shock. Many had never seen Kale mark anyone personally. To do so was both an honor and a declaration of choice that no one could ignore. Kale's golden eyes met Lyra's pale ones. He did not speak. He did not need to. His gaze conveyed a question, a command, and a promise all at once. Lyra lifted her hand and the dagger touched her skin. A brief spark of light surged through her, tingling warmth spreading across her palm and arm. When the mark appeared, glowing faintly crimson, the hall erupted in astonished murmurs. Lyra felt an odd warmth in her chest, as if the mark had awakened something long dormant. At the same time, a tremor of fear whispered in her mind. She was bound now, her fate tied irrevocably to the Alpha King. Cale stood, the dagger withdrawn, his expression unreadable. He was calm, yet something flickered in his eyes, a mix of curiosity, challenge, and something softer, hidden beneath layers of command and control. The court dared not speak. No one had dared challenge Cale before, and now his choice had upended all expectations. Lyra's silence remained unbroken. She did not speak, and yet her eyes spoke volumes. They told of wonder, of apprehension, and a seed of trust forming where fear had once ruled. The crimson sigil glowed faintly, a small heartbeat against her skin. The court's reaction was mixed. Some saw opportunity, others danger, and all knew that a story had begun that no one could yet understand. As the ceremony ended, the court began to disperse, whispers echoing in the vast hall. Some nobles looked at her with envy, others with suspicion. But Lyra did not falter. She remained at the center of the hall, her eyes meeting Cale's across the room. A silent understanding passed between them. Neither fully trusted the other, yet a connection had formed, an invisible thread that would pull them together in ways neither could foresee. Outside, the blood-red moon hung low over the castle, casting long shadows that crept like living things over the stone courtyard. Cale walked beside her silently as she was led back to her chambers, the weight of the mark heavy on both their minds. "You are aware," Cale said at last, his voice low and almost intimate, "that this mark is not just a symbol, it binds you to me. Others may fear you or seek to harm you, but I will not willingly." Lyra nodded slightly. Words were unnecessary, her gaze conveyed understanding. A bond had begun, fragile yet potent. It was a tether of destiny, stronger than fear, stronger than silence. That night Lyra lay awake, feeling the heat of the mark on her skin. She thought of the court, of the rejection, and of Cale. Questions she had never dared to consider whispered in her mind. Who was this Alpha who had chosen her? And why did she feel drawn to him despite everything? Meanwhile, Cale paced his chambers restless. For years he had ruled with strength and strategy, never allowing sentiment to interfere. Yet tonight something had shifted. That silent Omega girl, quiet and still, had stirred feelings he could neither name nor suppress. The kingdom slept under the crimson moon, oblivious to the stirrings of fate. In the shadows, ancient powers and whispers of prophecy began to awaken, sensing the mark that tied Lyra and Cale together. What had begun as a ceremony of presentation had become the first step in a story of destiny, danger, and perhaps redemption. As the night deepened, Lyra whispered to herself for the first time in years, though no sound escaped her lips. Her thoughts were loud enough. "I will not fail. I will not be afraid." And far above, in the watchtower, a crow cawed into the darkness, its cry carrying a message that only the wise would understand. The silent Omega's fate was no longer her own. The crimson mark glowed faintly under the moonlight, a heartbeat of promise, danger, and awakening. And somewhere deep within her, Lyra felt the first stirrings of a power long hidden, waiting for the moment it could rise. The court thought the ceremony was over. The nobles believed the night had ended in its usual spectacle of hierarchy and judgment. But for Lyra and Cale, the night had only just begun. The crimson sigil was more than a mark. It was a tether of destiny, a spark of transformation, and a warning to the kingdom. Everything would change, and the silent Omega girl would no longer be ignored. And in the stillness of her chambers, Lyra pressed her hand to the mark, feeling a warmth that was both frightening and comforting. Her silence, once her shield, now felt like the first step toward a power she had never understood, and a story that would unfold beyond her wildest imaginings. The morning after the ceremony, the castle of Urindor was quieter than usual. The crimson moon had faded, leaving only the pale light of dawn touching the black stone walls. Yet the air seemed heavy, filled with anticipation. In every hallway, whispered questions lingered. Why did the Alpha King mark the silent Omega girl? What did it mean for the kingdom? Lyra sat in her chambers, her silver hair catching the early light. She had spent the night staring at the crimson sigil on her hand. It no longer burned, but a warmth lingered, as if it had its own heartbeat. She traced the faint lines with her fingers, feeling a strange connection to Kale, the Alpha King who had chosen her. She did not know why he had marked her. Many theories had already spread through the castle. Some said Kale saw a rare power in her, one that could shift the balance of the kingdom. Others whispered that he simply desired to challenge tradition, showing that even the strongest king could act on whim. Lyra did not speak, so she could not explain herself, nor could she question him. Silence was both her strength and her shield. And yet she could feel something stirring in her chest, something unspoken, a thread that tied her fate to Kale's. Kale walked through the corridors, his black cloak sweeping behind him. Even in daylight, his presence commanded attention. Guards, servants, and nobles stepped aside without a word. The crimson sigil on Lyra's hand was a public declaration now, and it weighed on him as heavily as it did on her. He did not fear her, he did not doubt her, but he did feel an unfamiliar pull, a need to understand her, to see beyond the quiet mask she wore. Kale had ruled for years, mastering politics, battle, and fear. Yet with Lyra all his certainty wavered. She was silent, yet she spoke in ways he could not ignore. Kale stopped outside her chamber. His reflection in the polished stone floor showed a man conflicted. A king who had never doubted his power now faced an enigma he could not command. He raised his hand, knocked lightly, and waited. Lyra opened the door. Her eyes met his, pale and steady. She did not bow, she did not step back. She simply looked, as if inviting him to see her for what she truly was. "You need to learn to move carefully," Kale said quietly. "The court is watching and many will try to challenge you. Do not let fear control you." Lyra nodded once. She could not speak, but her gaze was enough to show she understood. The mark on her hand glowed faintly, as if responding to her resolve. Kale studied her for a moment, noticing how her small movements carried a hidden strength. "You are stronger than they think," he said. "And perhaps stronger than even you believe." For a brief moment the distance between them seemed smaller. Something unspoken passed between them, trust, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of longing. That day the court resumed its daily routines, but eyes constantly drifted toward Lyra. Some nobles were cautious, others envious. Rumors spread quickly, and no one dared openly question the king's choice, yet everyone wondered what it meant for the balance of power. Lyra was escorted to the training grounds by Kale himself. He had insisted she learn not only etiquette but also the ways of the kingdom, its secrets, its magic, and its dangers. Her silence was a challenge, but Kale did not need words to instruct her. Through gestures, demonstrations, and patient observation, she learned quickly. She discovered that she possessed a subtle power. At first it was small, a flicker of warmth in her hands, a shift in the air around her when her emotions grew strong. Kale noticed these signs and studied her closely. "Do you feel it?" he asked once, pointing to the slight shimmer in her fingers. Lyra's eyes widened, but she did not answer. Instead, she reached out, and the faint warmth in the air seemed to bend toward her, responding to her silent will. Kale's expression darkened, not in anger but in awe. "This is more than most Omegas have," he said softly. "You must learn to control it, or it may control you." Lyra nodded. The idea of control was not new to her. For years she had controlled her own silence, her own movements, and her own destiny, at least as best as she could. Now she sensed that her power was tied to the Crimson Sigil, tied to Kale in a way she did not yet fully understand. Evenings were the hardest. The castle was quieter then, shadows creeping along the walls like living things. Kale would often find her in the gardens, sitting beneath the ancient moon trees. She liked the stillness of those moments, when the wind whispered through the branches and no one demanded anything from her. Kale joined her without speaking. His presence was a shadow beside her light, but it was not threatening. It was steady, protective. "You do not fear me," he observed quietly. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her silence answering more than words ever could. "You should," he said softly, almost to himself. "I am dangerous, I rule with power, and I do not forgive weakness. Yet," he paused, studying her carefully, "you are not weak, you are different." Lyra felt a warmth spread in her chest at his words, not pride, not happiness, but recognition. She had never been truly seen before. The king's hand hovered near hers, but he did not touch. Still, the air between them hummed with tension. The bond of the Crimson Sigil was not just magic. It was connection, destiny, and something deeper that neither dared name aloud. Days passed, and Lyra's training continued. The court began to notice subtle changes. She moved with quiet confidence. Her eyes no longer lowered at whispers, and her posture carried the faint strength of someone who had survived more than anyone could guess. Yet danger lingered. Rumors of her lineage began to surface. Some spoke of a curse that had haunted her family for generations. Others claimed her blood held a magic long feared by the oldest mages. The whispers were not idle. Secret factions in the court began plotting, seeing her as a tool or a threat. Kale sensed it. He instructed her to remain cautious. "Power invites envy," he said, "and envy leads to betrayal. Trust no one blindly." Lyra's eyes, calm yet alert, followed his every movement. She felt the truth in his warning. The Crimson Sigil bound her to Kale, yes, but it also made her a target. She did not fear him. She feared what others might do to control her or to harm him through her. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from the northern provinces, bearing news of strange occurrences. Livestock disappearing, shadows moving where none should be, and whispers of dark magic stirring in the forests. Kale's brow furrowed. The kingdom was already delicate, and now something ancient and unseen was awakening. He turned to Lyra. "This is why I marked you," he said quietly. "Your power is rare. The kingdom may need it whether you like it or not, and I may need it too." Lyra's pulse quickened. She had never been asked to participate in the defense of the kingdom before, and yet she sensed that Kale did not ask lightly. She nodded silently, accepting the unspoken challenge. Kale smiled faintly, almost for the first time since she had met him. "Good," he said. "We will face this together." That night, Lyra lay beneath her blankets, listening to the sounds of the castle. Every creak, every whisper, seemed amplified by the tension in the air. The Crimson Sigil pulsed softly on her wrist. She reached out to it instinctively, feeling a warmth that was no longer just her own. It was tied to Kale, to the kingdom, and to something far larger than herself. In her dreams, she saw flickers of shadowy figures moving through the forests, glimpses of eyes glowing in the dark, and strange whispers that called her name. Yet in each vision, Kale stood beside her, his presence steady and commanding. She woke with a start, heart pounding. The connection was no longer abstract. It was real, tangible, and demanding attention. She understood now that her silence would not protect her. Her power, her bond with Kale, and her destiny were intertwined. The following day, Kale summoned the council. Lyra accompanied him, silent but present. The nobles stared, some with curiosity, some with thinly veiled fear. Kale addressed them with authority, explaining that threats were rising in the north and that Lyra's abilities would be instrumental in safeguarding the kingdom. Whispers erupted. Some murmured about the danger of a silent Omega wielding magic. Others praised the king's wisdom. Kale ignored the comments, his eyes on Lyra. In that gaze, she felt both challenge and trust, a quiet acknowledgement that she was no longer merely an observer. Later, as they walked back through the castle halls, Kale spoke again, his voice lower now, almost intimate. "You will face challenges, Lyra. Not all will understand you, and some will fear what they cannot control. But remember this, you are not alone. I chose you for a reason. And together, we will stand stronger than any who oppose us." Lyra's eyes met his. In the silence, she felt something she had never felt before: safety, strength, and a spark of something tender, fragile, and powerful all at once. The crimson sigil glowed faintly under her sleeve, a reminder that she was no longer just herself. She was tied to Kale, to the kingdom, and to a destiny that demanded courage, trust, and awakening. And somewhere beyond the walls of the castle, shadows shifted. Ancient forces stirred, sensing the bond that had been formed and the power that had begun to awaken. The kingdom's peace was fragile, and the path ahead was uncertain. But Lyra did not falter. Her silence was her strength, her eyes carried resolve, and her heart, though quiet, was ready to face the trials to come. The northern forests of Erendor were alive with whispers. Leaves trembled as if speaking secrets, and shadows moved where no light reached. The kingdom had felt safe under Kale's rule for decades, but now uncertainty slithered like a living thing, hidden yet threatening. Lyra stood at the edge of the castle's northern tower, her pale hands resting on the cold stone. The crimson sigil on her wrist pulsed faintly, warm and steady. She could feel it in her chest, a heartbeat not entirely her own, a connection to Kale that was both comforting and powerful. She had trained for weeks under his guidance. Each day brought new lessons: sword drills, magical exercises, and the subtleties of court politics. Kale's patience was strict but not cruel. He understood that she learned differently, silently, absorbing knowledge in her own way. And she had grown stronger. Not just in skill, but in spirit. Yet the shadows beyond the walls stirred. Ancient magic, long dormant, seemed to sense the awakening of Lyra's power. Rumors in the castle had already begun, whispers of a faction plotting to seize the Omega's power for themselves. Kale had warned her, but now the threat felt tangible. Kale approached silently. His presence was like a shadow that warmed rather than threatened. He did not speak at first, simply observing Lyra with that piercing gaze of his. "You feel it too," he said finally, voice low. "The forests, they are restless. Something is coming." Lyra nodded, her eyes following the wind as it stirred the trees below. The air hummed with tension. She felt a prickling sensation along her arms, as if the magic she had only glimpsed before was beginning to wake fully. Kale reached out, brushing a strand of her silver hair from her face. "Do not fear," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Though she could not speak, her eyes conveyed the gratitude and trust she could not voice. The bond between them, sealed by the crimson sigil, had grown stronger. It was more than magic. It was connection, understanding, and a silent promise. The first warning came that evening. A messenger arrived at Kale's chambers, breathless and pale. "Sire, a group from the northern villages reports disappearances. People vanish without trace. Shadows move unnaturally, and livestock have been found drained of life." Kale's eyes darkened. "Prepare the guards," he ordered. "And Lyra, you must come. Your presence is necessary." Lyra's heart beat faster, but she did not hesitate. She had trained for this, and now the first test of her power had come. She and Kale rode together through the forest, the night thick and heavy. Lanterns glowed faintly, casting dancing shadows along the path. Every rustle, every whisper of wind seemed alive, carrying a warning. As they reached the northern village, Lyra could feel the fear lingering in the air. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, and even the bravest villagers avoided looking at her. The crimson sigil seemed to pulse faster under her sleeve, sensing the danger around her. Kale dismounted and led her to the center of the village. Here the first signs were visible: trampled fields, broken fences, and strange scorch marks along the ground. The air carried a sharp tang of magic, dark, twisted, and unnatural. Lyra knelt, placing her hands lightly on the earth. A wave of energy pulsed from her, subtle but immediate. The wind shifted, carrying whispers that only she could sense. Her power responded to her intention, bending the shadows away from the frightened villagers. Kale watched silently, pride and awe mixing in his gaze. "You are stronger than they realize," he said. "But this is only the beginning." Suddenly, a shadow moved across the clearing. A figure, tall and cloaked, stepped from the darkness. Its eyes glowed like embers, and the air around it twisted unnaturally. "You have awakened," the figure said, voice like a hiss. "The Omega stirs, and the kingdom will burn for her power." Lyra felt a surge of fear, but also something else, a defiance she had never known. She rose slowly, the crimson sigil glowing brighter under her sleeve. The connection to Kale felt like a shield, steady and unyielding. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and the shadow. "You will harm no one here," he said, voice cold and commanding. "Leave or face the consequences." The figure laughed softly. "Consequences, she does not yet know her strength, but soon she will choose, and then the world will tremble." With a swirl of darkness, the figure vanished into the forest, leaving only silence and the scent of charred earth. That night, Kale and Lyra returned to the castle. The danger had passed for now, but the tension lingered. Lyra could feel her power growing, restless and eager. It was not merely magic, it was an extension of herself, tied to the bond she shared with Kale. And yet she had never felt fear like this before. In the quiet of Kale's chambers, he watched her carefully. "Do you understand what that means?" he asked. "The force is gathering, they will not stop. They will test you, push you, even try to use your power against me, against the kingdom." Lyra's eyes met his. She did not speak, but her gaze was steady. She would face whatever came. "You are ready," Kale said softly, almost as if convincing himself. "More ready than you know." But he hesitated, a rare break in his usual composure. "I cannot shield you from everything. Only you can control it, Lyra, only you." For a moment, silence filled the room. The crimson sigil glowed faintly, a heartbeat connecting them both. Lyra felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength of her bond with Kale. Days passed, and the northern forests remained restless. Kale increased her training, pushing her further, testing her abilities in ways that were both physical and magical. Lyra learned quickly, her silent determination allowing her to adapt and grow in ways few could. During one evening session, Kale watched her manipulate a small flame, controlling its movement with her mind. She was focused, graceful, and precise. But as the flame danced, shadows from the corners of the training yard twisted unnaturally, reacting to her power. "Careful," Kale warned. "The energy you command does not belong solely to you. It responds to the world around it, and not all responses are friendly." Lyra nodded, concentrating harder. She felt the magic bending, resisting, and then yielding to her control. When the shadows finally stilled, Kale approached. "Well done," he said. "You are learning faster than I anticipated." The bond between them deepened beyond training. In the quiet moments, Kale would share stories of the kingdom, of battles fought and alliances forged. Lyra listened, absorbing every word. Though she did not speak, her presence offered a calm Kale had not known in years. One evening, under the moonlight in the garden, Kale placed a hand on hers. The touch was light but steady. "You trust me," he said. Lyra's eyes met his. She nodded slightly. Trust had been difficult for her, years of silence and rejection teaching caution. Yet here with Kale it felt possible. "Good," he whispered, "because soon you will need to trust not just me but yourself, and your power." The crimson sigil pulsed faintly under their joined hands. It was more than a mark, it was a connection, a promise and a warning. As the weeks passed, Kale sensed the court's unease growing. Nobles whispered about Lyra's growing strength, about the strange events in the north, and about the bond she shared with the Alpha King. Some admired her, others feared her. Some envied her. All watched. One night a secret message arrived, slipped beneath Kale's door. It was brief, written in careful, curling script. The Omega awakens fully. Protect her or the kingdom falls. Kale's brow furrowed. He had sensed threats before, but the certainty of this warning chilled him. Lyra's power was awakening faster than expected. Forces, ancient, hidden, and dangerous, were stirring. The kingdom's balance was fragile, and only they could prevent it from tipping into chaos. He found Lyra in the gardens, sitting beneath the moon trees. The wind stirred her hair gently, and her eyes reflected the pale light. Kale approached quietly, kneeling beside her. "They know," he said softly. "They know your power, and they will come for it. Are you ready?" Lyra's eyes met his. She did not answer, but she did not look away. Her gaze carried the certainty of someone who had faced rejection, isolation, and fear, and survived. She was ready. Kale smiled faintly, a rare expression of warmth. "Then we face them together," he said. The crimson sigil pulsed, glowing stronger, almost as if responding to their shared determination. For the first time, Lyra felt truly powerful, not just because of her magic, but because of the bond she shared with Kale, a silent bond that spoke louder than words ever could. The night was heavy with storm clouds over Erendor. The sky darkened as though the world itself held its breath. The northern forests whispered with movement, shadows shifting unnaturally under the faint light of the waning moon. Lyra stood beside Kale at the edge of the castle walls, the crimson sigil glowing softly on her wrist. Tonight, the threat they had anticipated for weeks would finally arrive. The air trembled, and Lyra felt it deep in her chest. Her power, once small and tentative, had grown. She could feel the currents of magic flowing through the air, bending to her will, responding to her heartbeat. But tonight, it would not be enough to test control. It would test courage, trust, and the bond she shared with Kale. Kale's hand brushed hers. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low and steady. The golden fire in his eyes met her pale gaze. Lyra nodded. No words passed between them, yet understanding flowed in silence. The crimson sigil pulsed in response, connecting them in rhythm, a heartbeat shared between two souls bound by destiny. The first wave came from the forest, figures cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing unnaturally, their presence thick with dark magic. They moved quickly, silently, surrounding the clearing before Kale and Lyra. The villagers who had come to help were already retreating, fear frozen on their faces. Kale stepped forward, sword drawn, his movements precise and commanding. "Stand behind me," he ordered, voice ringing with authority. Lyra's hands glowed faintly as the energy of the sigil responded to her. Shadows swirled unnaturally, pushed back by her subtle, growing power. The enemy advanced, and Kale's strategy was flawless. Yet Lyra felt the pull of something deeper, a power not just of defense but of creation. She focused, and the air around her shimmered, bending to her will. The shadows faltered, hesitating as if sensing the strength awakening within her. One of the cloaked figures stepped forward, its voice like ice. "The Omega cannot resist forever. Her power will be ours." Lyra's eyes narrowed. She did not speak, but she did not hesitate. She raised her hand, and a wave of energy shot outward, pushing back the darkness. The figures staggered, some falling to the ground, their forms flickering as though struggling to remain solid. Kale advanced alongside her, his sword cutting through the nearest threats. Together, they moved as one, Alpha and Omega, a team bound not just by power but by trust. Each motion, each gesture reflected a deep understanding. Where Kale's strength was precision and force, Lyra's was subtle yet relentless, bending energy and shadows to her will. The clash was brief but intense. The cloaked figures were strong but unprepared for the combination of Kale's command and Lyra's emerging magic. Shadows scattered, and the last of the figures vanished into the forest, leaving behind only whispers of defeat. Breathing heavily, Kale turned to Lyra. "You did well," he said, pride and relief mixing in his tone. The crimson sigil glowed brighter, as if celebrating her victory. Lyra's eyes reflected exhaustion but also determination. For the first time, she felt the full weight of her power and the responsibility it carried. She had survived fear, rejection, and silence, and now she had stood against a force that had terrified even seasoned warriors. Kale lowered his sword, and for a moment the only sound was the wind through the trees. Then he reached for her hand, gently holding it. "You are more than I ever imagined," he said softly. "Not just powerful, but brave, wise, and steadfast. You are extraordinary, Lyra." Lyra's eyes met his, and in that silent exchange she felt a warmth unlike any she had known. The bond between them, sealed by the crimson sigil, had grown stronger. It was not just magic, it was trust, understanding, and a promise that no force in the kingdom could sever. Back in the castle, the court awaited news of the northern battle. Word spread quickly. The Omega girl, once silent and overlooked, had stood against dark forces and survived. Some nobles were awed, others fearful, but all knew that the balance of power had shifted. Kale addressed the council with authority. "The threat is gone for now, but we must remain vigilant. Lyra's strength is not only hers, it is a force that protects us all. Respect it or risk the consequences." Whispers filled the room. Many who had scorned her now looked with admiration and some with envy. Lyra remained calm, silent as ever, but inside she felt a quiet pride. She had earned her place not through words, but through courage and action. In the quiet of the castle gardens that night, Kale and Lyra walked together beneath the moonlight. The battle was over, yet the tension of what had passed lingered. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echoes of magic. "You were remarkable today," Kale said, voice soft. "I have ruled this kingdom for decades, and I have never seen courage like yours. Never someone so quiet, yet so fierce." Lyra's eyes met his. Though she did not speak, the connection was clear. She had felt fear, yes, but she had also felt strength. And she had not faced it alone. Kale stopped, placing his hand gently on hers. "The sigil binds us," he said quietly. "But it is more than magic, it is trust, it is understanding, and it is hope." Lyra's hand responded, warm and steady against his. In that moment she understood what he meant. The crimson sigil was not just a mark, it was a bond, a promise, and a connection stronger than fear or doubt. The following days were spent in preparation. Though the northern threat had been repelled, Kale knew it was not the last challenge. Ancient magic, older than the kingdom itself, had stirred. Lyra's power was a beacon now, and forces both hidden and dangerous would come seeking it. Kale trained her further, combining physical combat with magical exercises. Lyra grew stronger with each passing day. She learned to control her power, bending energy and shadows with precision and grace. Yet it was not just strength she gained. It was confidence, trust, and a sense of purpose. One evening, as the sun set over the kingdom, Kale led her to the castle's highest tower. The wind blew through her hair, and the crimson sigil pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Look at the kingdom," Kale said, voice low but steady. "All of this is ours to protect, and you are now a part of it fully, your power, your courage, and your heart." Lyra's eyes scanned the land below, the villages, the forests, the mountains beyond. She understood now the weight of responsibility, but also the strength she carried. And for the first time, she felt truly seen, truly recognized, and truly alive. That night, as the moon rose high, the shadows of the northern forest shifted again. The dark figure that had watched her before returned, their eyes glowing brighter, filled with ancient intent. But this time, they did not act openly. They observed, calculating, waiting for a moment to strike when the Omega's full potential could be tested. Kale sensed it. He placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. No one can stand against us if we remain united." Lyra nodded, feeling the warmth of the crimson sigil pulse in response. The bond was more than magic. It was connection, strength, and a promise that neither distance nor danger could break. Days later, a formal ceremony was held in the castle courtyard. The court gathered to recognize Lyra's role and her bravery. Kale presented her to the nobles, no longer as a silent Omega overlooked by all, but as a woman whose strength and courage had saved the kingdom. Lyra stood tall, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight, eyes steady and clear. For the first time she felt pride, not in acceptance, not in approval, but in knowing she had earned her place through courage, wisdom, and strength. Kale approached her, placing his hand over hers once more. "You are no longer just the silent Omega," he said softly. "You are a queen in every sense, wise, brave, and strong, and you are mine as I am yours." Lyra's eyes met his, and though she did not speak, the meaning was clear. The crimson sigil glowed warmly, a heartbeat connecting them, stronger than any words could convey. As the sun set over Erendor, the kingdom seemed at peace. Shadows lingered at the edges of forests, and whispers of magic drifted on the wind, but the immediate threat had passed. Lyra and Kale walked through the castle gardens, hand in hand, silent yet entirely understood. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty together. The bond between them had been tested and had grown unbreakable. The crimson sigil was more than a mark, it was a promise, a tether of trust and love, and a symbol of courage awakened. Lyra's journey from silence to strength, from isolation to connection, had reached its first great triumph. But she knew this was only the beginning. The kingdom's magic was vast, ancient, and unpredictable. Challenges would come again. Yet as she walked beside Kale, she felt no fear. The shadows could shift, the forest could stir, and dangers could rise. She was ready. She was not alone. And for the first time she knew that silence could be her strength, not her weakness.